Here we go.
Good evening. Nice to see everyone. Hope you've enjoyed this brief rainy summer vacation. Welcome to our special board workshop in the Merle Peacock Room. This is Thursday, August 3rd, 2023 at 5:30 p.m. I will call us to order by going around the room, starting with you over there.
I'm Jim Lothridge.
Diane Potter,
Laura Henderson.
Cullen McGough.
Megan Carlson,
Becky Pless.
Tony Beat.
Chris McGowan.
Molly Rogers.
Jack Vitters.
Jeff Hanley. Matt Lily Bridge.
Administrative staff.
Beth Hopkins, Superintendent.
That's printing right now.
Angela Hardy, Director of Curriculum.
Jackie Bray, High School Assistant Principal.
Lauren Arnold, High School Principal.
Jared Dumas, High School Assistant Principal.
Kate Dennis, Middle School Assistant Principal.
And Terry McGuire, Technology.
Sorry.
Thank you.
I think it's just, those are actually, I think, for you.
Correspondence.
Yeah, just as written, I would remind the board that that correspondence came in June. I forgot to attach it to the June agenda. So I've done so here.
Thank you. All right, next on the agenda is policy IMDb flag displays, and we're gonna have a discussion on display of materials on MSAD11 property and our legal obligations with
Civil rights.
Yep, with our civil rights and human rights. So I'll turn that over to
So to lead this conversation, to really facilitate this, we invited Melissa Huey. Melissa Huey is one of our school attorneys out of Drummond Woodsum, and she is here to conduct the presentation regarding the student civil rights, free speech, and then we will kind of open it up for dialogue, conversation, and she will help us facilitate that discussion. So Melissa, thank you so much for coming. I appreciate you being here.
Okay. So good evening, everybody, and thank you for inviting me here. As Pat said, I'm a lawyer at Drummond Woodsum. I have put together a PowerPoint presentation to sort of keep us on track. Done a lot of PowerPoint presentations in my career. I never spend any time with the title. There's first time for everything, and I do want to spend a little time with this title just to start out. So the title of what we're going to be talking about tonight is Student Civil Rights and Free Speech, the start of a board conversation. And there are a couple of things that I want to point out about that. The first, is I have heard some rumblings or some rumors that I was here to provide civil rights training to you. That's not the case. Civil rights training is a huge topic. It's a topic that I alone would not be qualified to do, and it's certainly a topic that I couldn't do in one hour board presentation. So I'm talking about a really pretty small but important slice of civil rights, talking about student civil rights and free speech. So that's number one. Number two, the start of a board conversation. Two important things about that. The first is the concept that this is just the start of a conversation. This is, even though I said it's a small slice of civil rights, it's a big issue. It's a complicated issue. It's an issue that you are not going to be able to resolve tonight. We need to just start that conversation. I'm here to point out some of the basics for you so that you can really get that conversation going. The second thing is the word conversation. Don't make me talk the whole time. I really want to get people talking, asking questions, and working through this. So anytime that we're talking about an issue that is as important as this one, I think you have to start with the real foundation of and the core value that we're talking about. In looking for that, I've looked at your policies, which give us a lot of guidance. But what I really found is this core foundational value right in your Gardner area high school the student handbook. the mission statement, and I want to read through it. The Gardner area high school community believes that education enriches people's lives. We promote personal improvement and excellence in academics, the arts, athletics, and extracurricular activities in a safe, respectful environment. This institution guarantees educational opportunities regardless of situation. And I want to say that again because I think that's really, even though it fits with Tiger, which is kind of cool, it's also really elegant language. This institution guarantees opportunities regardless of situation. Our programs and services assist students in becoming lifelong learners, ethical and responsible citizens, and productive workers. Students are encouraged to be unique individuals, rise to their potential, think critically and independently, adapt to new situations, make responsible choices, and respect each other. So what we're talking about here tonight is how to deliver on that promise to provide equal education opportunities to everyone, regardless of situation, and how that goal intersects sometimes positively and sometimes negatively with the rights of a diverse student body from a diverse community to freedom of expression. So let's start talking about legal principles. That's what we are, and it's not principals, it's principles. That's what we always do when we're lawyers. So I'm going to start with the First Amendment. You all know that the First Amendment guarantees the right of freedom of expression. You all obviously, I'm sure, know that that right is not absolute. There's certain types of speech that can be prohibited by the government, and in this case, the school. We can certainly prohibit hate speech, true threats. We can prohibit pornographic language. In schools, you can prohibit anything that promotes use of drugs. But other than those and a couple other categories, free speech, regardless of whether we agree with it or not, is protected. So you start with that sort of broad view that free speech is protected, but then you have to bore down a little more carefully. And the first thing you need to do is differentiate between school-sponsored speech and individual speech. And that's important when you're talking about students, employees, and the community. So school-sponsored speech is obviously speech that's sponsored by the school, and the school has a greater ability to limit that. So the Supreme Court case dealing with that is one dealing with a student newspaper. And a student wanted to write some things in a newspaper, the school didn't want them to, and the Supreme Court says, this is school-sponsored speech, and the school pretty much gets to decide what can and cannot go into a newspaper. So a lot of what we do in schools is school-sponsored speech, and that's important because it can be regulated more than other things. Individual speech, on the other hand, can't be regulated quite as much as other than those categories that I talked about. There is more of a right of individuals to express their opinions. Now, that right is not absolute in schools. Many of you may have be familiar with the Tinker armband case, where students were wearing black armbands to protest the Vietnam War, and the school tried to say you can't do that. And the Supreme Court says no. Students don't leave their constitutional rights at the schoolhouse door. You still have the right as a student to express yourself in school, as long as you're doing it in the proper time, place, and manner, and you're doing it in a way that is not disruptive to schools. So often when we're talking about student speech, we're looking at whether there's disruption and where that speech is taking place. Make sense? People are looking at it. I'm wondering whether, okay. So you've got school-sponsored speech, you've got individual speech. The next thing you have to do in determining how much you can regulate speech, if you choose to, is determine what type of a forum you've created. So there's the first type of a forum, the broadest type where speech is pretty much unrestricted, is a public forum. And that traditionally was the town square. People can go to the town square and they can express their views as long as it's not within one of those very narrow exceptions, no matter who agrees with them or who doesn't agree with them or what they're talking about. That's an open forum, and the government cannot restrict what people are saying based on the content, ever, basically. Then there's a private forum, and that is pretty much closed. So you can, if you have a private forum, you can decide what speech is allowed and what speech isn't. And then there's a limited public forum where you can sort of limit the topics that are going to be discussed. But once you've decided what topics are going to be discussed, you can't make content-based regulation. So a good example of that is a school board meeting. You have public comment during a school board meeting. People can get up and say what they want to say, but they can't say anything they want to say. They can't get up and say, I'm having a bake sale at my house next week, everybody should come, or people should eat Cheetos rather than Frito-Lays or whatever, something like that. It has to be, and the school's policy says, you have to be talking about things that relate to the school. Limited public forum. So in a limited public forum, you can regulate the topics. You just can't regulate topics based on content. Make sense? Any questions? Yeah, I'm being clear. Maybe this won't be an hour. Maybe it'll be like 15 minutes. So let's go on and talk about a little bit about why it's important to comply with the First Amendment. Don't look at the slide. What do you guys think? First Amendment important and why? I think I saw you looking at the slide. Me?
No, when you said it, I looked at it, yes, totally. I'm super
You said
suggestive.
don't,
Yeah.
I can't tell you what it says.
So what do you think? Why is it important, the First Amendment?
It's the First Amendment on the Bill of Rights, right? So it's a fundamental piece of who we are as Americans and defines our freedom to believe and to, I think really backs up our ability to vote. We can say what we want within reason.
Anybody else?
You get to criticize government.
And that really protects democracy, right? Because you
Right.
can have that discussion of what works and what doesn't. And that's why that's a fundamental part of our country. So that's number one, even if you didn't look at the, now you can look at the slide, important for protection of our democracy. Number two, I have up there is potential liability under 1442 USC Section 1983. Again, I'm a lawyer, I look at liability. So if you are a governmental entity and you violate somebody's First Amendment rights, they can sue you in federal court. And if they win, they can get damages, they can get their attorney's fees, they can get an injunction forcing you to allow them to exercise their First Amendment rights. So from a liability perspective, also, it's really important to comply with the First Amendment. The last thing I have on here, and I think this is really important when you go back to your foundational statement of creating ethical and responsible students, is that the First Amendment really contributes toward that goal of assisting students to become responsible citizens. So if you're not allowing students to exercise their First Amendment rights ever in school, and then you're sending them out after they graduate and suddenly they're able to do that and they're able to participate in the democratic process, they don't have the tools to be able to do that in an appropriate and effective manner. So one of the reasons that that protecting First Amendment rights in the school context is so important is that it's a real important part of educating people in their civic responsibilities and how best to exercising. Any questions? Any pushback?
You
It's not-
need to know the language of 1983 as a school board. Should we know that language?
It just basically says that people can sue governmental entities for violation of their federally protected rights. So that's the statute that allows people to sue for violation of the First Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or equal protection rights, all of those different things. So it's other than knowing that it's a biggie, you're good.
Do you happen to know roughly what's the largest payout in a damage suit against the school for violation of the First Amendment?
I have no idea. I know that there are no large payouts in Maine yet. I also know that Maine's verdicts are getting higher and higher every year. So is it $100,000? Is it $500,000? I don't know. What I do know is that other piece, the paying for the successful plaintiff's legal fees is always a big ticket item because, as you all know, lawyers are super expensive, except for me. Other questions?
I'm interested in the way Jeff said what he did, that we can criticize the government. And I believe that we can criticize the government. So what we're experiencing, however, is when you criticize an institution, which I absolutely believe we should be able to do, it becomes very personal very quickly. So how do we parse that out?
And that, I think, is one of the reasons why this is so important in the school context. It's educating people about how to debate views without being personal. And that takes a lot of learning and so that's partly in the hands of your administrators and your teachers. And one of the things I'm going to be talking about is the importance of giving those people support so that they're able to help guide students through that. Is it ever going to be the case that members of the public are going to stop personalizing their criticisms? No. But is it also that, but the fact of the matter is that when people are able to take the personalities out of it, the people and the individual things out of it, and talk about broader ideas, that's when they're most successful in pushing the change that they want. And that's what we're trying to teach kids and employees and everybody to be able to do. Make sense?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that in 5 minutes is everything, not everything, but a little bit you need to know about the First Amendment. Now let's talk a little bit about discrimination. So you have federal and state law. There's the Maine Human Rights Act, which covers most discrimination in schools. And then there's Title VII and Title IX that protect individuals based on protected status of race, religion, sexual orientation, disability, age, etc. I'm going to say. And then there's also, so those are laws that if you violate them, you can be sued. And if you're sued, you're gonna and lose. Again, you're gonna then I can tell you that there are caps on those. So the most you can lose on a federal case is $500,000. The most you can lose on a state case is $800,000 plus attorney's fees. But those are pretty big ticket items. Where was I? Oh, so anyway, they're federal and state laws. And I think it's important when you're thinking about discrimination to remember that discrimination partly is treating people differently, but it's also has the protection against being harassed based on the protected status. So that's basically unkind treatment, lack of support for people based on protected status. That's a squishier kind of concept. It has to be, in order to be actionable in court, it has to be severe and pervasive, which means it has to happen quite a bit. But you don't know day to day when quite a bit gets to be quite a bit. So it's important for employers and for schools to prevent harassment based on protected status at the very lowest level before it rises to something that might be actionable. So there's the law, then there's the district law, and that's board policy. So you can't sue somebody based on a board violation of a board, or you can't sue a school based on violation of a board policy. But a board policy, in my view, is particularly important because that's the law that you all have chosen for yourselves. Those are the rules that you have decided you're going to govern yourself by. You expect your students to follow your policies, and if they don't, they're disciplined. They could be expelled. You expect your employees to follow those policies, and if they don't, they could be disciplined, they could be terminated, and for the same reason, you all also have to follow those policies. It doesn't make sense to hold people that you're responsible for respond to certain things and not follow them yourselves. So I want to just go through a couple of your board policies that really bear on this issue. Policy AC, discrimination against and harassment of school employees and also students because of race, color, sex, sexual orientation, gender identity, religion, ancestry, or national origin or disability are prohibited. The policy then goes on and says the board directs the school administration to implement a continuing program designed to prevent discrimination against all students. So what you're telling people is we're not going to discriminate. And not only that, but we're going to tell our administrators that they need to make sure that our students are not discriminated against. So that's an extra step. And remembering that discrimination includes harassment, you can see that that is a huge obligation on the part of your administrators. But it's an important one. Policy ACAA, that's your gender expansive policy. The purposes of this policy are to 1, foster a learning environment that is safe and free from discrimination, harassment, and bullying. And 2, assist in the education and social integration of transgender and gender expansive students in our school. Again, that's a policy, that's a rule that you have imposed on your district. Policy JI, recognizing that all students have civil rights, including the right to equal education opportunity and freedom from discrimination. And I think what's important there is that's all students. And sometimes people sort of lose sight of the fact that that's all students, regardless of what we're thinking of one student or another. But your policy says, again, all students, regardless of situation, to bring back that elegant language. Policy ADAA, the MSAD11 board seeks to create and maintain a school climate in which ethical and responsible behavior can flourish. So just to step back for a minute, you can see that your policies are broader than what the law requires. I think that's an important point because sometimes we focus specifically on what federal and state law states. But what you've done is develop a school community based on these norms, and making sure that you are following them is really important. And that's sort of what we're talking about today. So comments, thoughts? Yes.
Obviously, you deal with a lot of school boards across the state. How many school boards have a policy similar to this, more responsive or less responsive to the needs? Can you give us a feel for that?
I can't give you a number. I can say that you are pretty much at the top of a recognition that all students are protected by this. Some schools will limit that protection just to protected statuses under the law. What your policy does, which I think is really awesome, is protect all students regardless of, what's that word again? Situation. So that covers, so what you're doing is covering not only protected status, but other things that could potentially adversely affect students, like socioeconomic background or households makeup or things like that. And understanding and putting into policy the notion that every single person in your school deserves the support that will allow them to flourish is, I think, pretty extraordinary and probably a little bit above the norm.
If
I'm
we,
not gonna trash any of my other clients.
using this as a guideline, are we more or less likely to be susceptible to a lawsuit if there is a perceived, not necessarily that we perceive, but a student or a parent perceives to be against our own policy? If we're doing, is it more easy to sue under this, or is this a protective measure that we protect ourselves better as long as we adhere to this policy?
So I would say the answer to that is really neither. I don't think that you are more likely to be sued or lose a lawsuit because you have a broad policy. Because as I said before, there's no cause of action for failure to follow your own policies. So what the only cause of action that you have is under what the state and federal law require you to do. On the other hand, I think the policy is intended to protect students rather than protect the district. So I don't think it's about protecting the broader part of the policy isn't really a liability piece, but more an educational piece.
So the lawsuits would be brought by either the federal or state standards, not necessarily by what we have down as a policy. They wouldn't use that to hang their hat on.
Well, people hang their hats on all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, I know, that's what I'm getting at.
But they wouldn't have a legitimate legal argument that because you violated a policy, you owe somebody X amount of money.
Okay, thank you.
Would you mind jumping back a little bit to your unpacking the notion of forums? Because I think that's actually really important in what we're discussing here. In other cases or other incidences, is a hallway considered a public forum, or is it a limited forum that is governed by the speech that the school chooses to provide?
So the answer to that is it depends what you make it. So the government has the right to create the forum. So if you say anyone can come into our hallway and say whatever they want, then you've created a public forum. And once you've created the public forum, it's hard to make it not a public forum. But you don't say that, I hope. What you say is that people who can be here, have people who have a reason to be in our hall can be in our hall. And you can, generally, I think most schools either create a private forum for, say what you can post on the walls in a hallway or something like that, or sometimes a limited public forum, or sometimes a little bit of each. So you might have a bulletin board where people can post what they're thinking about that has to do with the school. That would be a limited public forum because students can come and say what they want to say. Or you might say the bulletin boards and hallways in our school are the administration decides what's going to be put on those walls, in which case you've got a private forum. Does that answer your question?
I think so. I guess I realize I don't know what our policy is regarding our hallways?
Probably a mix.
Right now, you have, it's built in the student handbook that the administration has to pre-approve what is put on walls and hallways.
So that would be on the private side. Other questions, thoughts?
Oh, can you force students to participate in something they don't wish to?
So
I'll give you an example.
they have to go to math class.
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, like, if they're gonna have an event at school, like a gay pride event in the gymnasium, and the school was gonna all go to it. If someone was offended and didn't wish to attend, could they be forced to go?
So it depends on the context. If it's an educational experience, I think you probably have a policy that allow parents to opt out of things that they're not.
Well, can a student opt out?
So I think that the parents, I'm
It's the parents.
going,
Okay, it's the parent.
Jeff, think of it like even like sex education or movies, we get letters that say, if you don't want to be part of this, check the box.
Well, I didn't, I
Yeah,
wasn't
the
sex
student
education, but say an event that made them uncomfortable. Can a school force children that have say a religious objection to what's gonna be presented? Can they force them to attend an assembly in the gymnasium?
so, and
Would they be violating that student's rights by forcing them to go?
so the answer probably is no. And the reason I'm pausing is because everything depends on context. If you have a school-wide assembly where you're talking about, let's pick something that's completely dinosaurs. And you have a student who believes that dinosaurs are a creature of the devil and doesn't want to go listen to dinosaurs. You can probably say everybody has to go. That's part of our school curriculum. And then if the student and the parents want to opt out using the opt-out policy, that's okay. But when we're talking about parts of the curriculum, a school can force kids to go to math class, to go to gym class, to go to assemblies and hear stuff unless their parents decide under the policy that they opt out. And that is not a violation of their rights.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reason we're here tonight has nothing to do with math and science. It has to do with gay pride events that were at the school and gay and, things that were being displayed and argued about. So I'm wondering if, again, you students are required to respect each other, I understand that. But can you force a student to be involved in something they find uncomfortable? Again, on that sexual line.
There was not a gay pride event.
No.
Did anyone, so
I'm
when you
being
say that,
hypothetical.
I understand, but you said what you said was there was a gay pride event at the high school. There was not a gay pride.
No, I wasn't saying the word. I said, if they were gonna have an event and it was gonna present something like that, and a student found it uncomfortable or against their religious beliefs, would you be violating that student's rights by forcing them to go? Again, I mean.
Put any subject in that area and her answer will probably be the same with context, I would assume.
It's about
It doesn't matter
context,
what the thing is, you know?
The policy says parents can exempt them, and if they still force them, they can appeal to the superintendent.
Right.
So if there's some sort of instruction based on, it says adopt ideas which they disagree, based on particular held religious, moral, philosophical beliefs, exemption from instruction which infringes on such beliefs may be requested by the parents or legal guardian. So
The
they
child
can,
itself can.
doesn't say that in the
Correct,
policy.
it's the parent.
Only the
And
parent.
any sort of event is gonna be announced ahead of time.
And they
Not
can't,
sort of spring it on them.
I'm
they
just,
can't excuse the student from meeting the requirements of learning results from their credit hours or requirements from graduation. So if it's required as part of their curriculum in graduation, they have to go, they can't excuse themselves out of those credits. But if it's something different, something that's, they can get a waiver to not go.
And I think you're actually getting at an important issue here. And that is that there are things that in schools that make people uncomfortable. And it may be your hypothetical gay pride, it may be your hypothetical dinosaurs, it may be race, it may be religion, it may be all kinds of different discussions that might make one or another student uncomfortable. And when you're faced with that, you have a policy that allows parents to opt out. So you put that to one side and follow that. But assuming that there isn't an opt-out, what you then go back to is that overarching view that you have adopted as a school board, that everybody should feel safe and supported. And if it's an event that that provides a safety and support for students, then that's something that furthers your goal. And that's really what we're here to talk about.
Can I ask a question? Does it matter whether it's a protected class? The topic is on a protected class, like race, sexuality, transgender? I mean, the women, does it matter whether the topic is a protected class?
So I don't know what you mean by matter.
So say, for example, if I'm a person of color and someone really disagrees that people of color should be in the school, can they opt out?
So putting your policy aside, well, and I think the policy, I think it would be difficult to opt out of anything that is part of the curriculum unless you follow the policy, whether it's correct, whether it's protected class or not. When you're talking about protected class, or I think anything that is part of a student's well-being and their personal whatever, then allowing people to opt out and allowing people to sort of say, I don't want to be associated with you, starts to seem discriminatory to me. And I would want to keep that to the very minimum, following exactly the policy that you have.
Thank you.
Just to be sure I understand it correctly. So what really happens though is like each year, the administrators work with the faculty to create a curriculum for the following year. The board, who's publicly elected, approves it. So there's no surprises in what's part of the curriculum. So that the check and balance there is that if the general public doesn't like the curriculum, you vote new people onto the board. So
Yes.
but again, it shouldn't show up as a lawsuit about what's part of the curriculum, ideally.
Yeah, and lawsuits about what's part of the curriculum go nowhere because the law is pretty clear that that's something that the school board decides and the administration and teachers put into effect. And so there's going to be different ways to do that, and there are going to be different things that your administration and your teachers may decide is important to provide support for different groups of students. Maybe students who are feeling marginalized, and they may feel that there are things to do that support them, and that is absolutely consistent with your policies.
I think, isn't it just as important for us as a school board, Jeff, to what you're saying, we need to make sure that the people afraid of dinosaurs are feeling supported and safe and comfortable just as much as the people who want to watch the dinosaur
I would
presentation.
talk about dinosaurs. Actually,
Hypothetically,
I mean, it's,
just a matter of providing a space for each person,
yeah, so, but I mean,
and our school should do.
to make other groups feel included, you need to, can you exclude someone else, their rights? In other words, like I said, someone who has a religious objection to, say, gay marriage, and there's going to be a class on it or something, and they don't want to go. Would you be violating their religious rights? As this policy says, you have to protect them. Would they have standing if they said, well, you know, that offends me, I don't want to go, I don't want to learn about it, so I don't need to be included in it? I mean, do they have the right also to be protected?
So I think choice is involved there too, but Jack's got his hand up, so I'm gonna.
The school board doesn't create curriculum based on some of these hypotheticals. The school board doesn't create standard curriculum for Pride. That's something that can be talked about, but it's not part of our curriculum. And nor is gay marriage part of the curriculum. It's not part of the system of learning results. And so in these cases, we're not talking about something that we have voted on as a school.
And I know that.
Please let me finish.
Yeah, I know.
It's hard to keep my train of thought. So we aren't doing those things, but in situations where we have a vibrant and diverse social curriculum outside of school, and there will be groups that, maybe there is a Pride meeting, maybe there is like discussion about this, and I feel like our goals in line with our policies, in line with what we are expected to do by law, is we create a space where we model and teach respectful dissent and advocacy, and we don't tolerate obstruction and abuse. So if somebody has a strong feeling against something, they're perfectly allowed to voice their opinions, but we need to make sure that they know that they can only do so in a way that is not crushing on somebody else.
There, done.
Yeah, but
We don't have
I'm not
anything more,
arguing.
right?
Yeah, but one
Have a
thing that you
thought?
are missing here is that you can't have the students making those decisions. And I'll tell you why. There'll be some that have a legitimate concern. They will have talked to their parents. Their parents will understand. It isn't like there's going to be an assembly sprung on them that we're going to go and we're not going to have a gay pride assembly this afternoon and everybody's got to be there. If we're going to have a gay pride assembly, which I have no problem with, then we let people know ahead of time, and we would always let people know ahead of time. And that person has an opportunity with their parents to decide, I really would not like to go to this. Okay, opt out. But if you leave it up to the students, there'll be a half a dozen kids out of the whole school that, I'm just picking a number, that don't want to go under principle. There'll be 50 more that don't want to go because they just don't want to go. And they'll say, this is why I don't want to go. So you can't leave it to the students. The parents need to be involved.
And I think that that's why what I've been focusing on is, if you're gonna have somebody opt out, you have a policy and you really need to always allow people to follow that policy, but you need to follow the policy.
Yeah.
You can't just kind of let things fall.
Yeah, my question, I think, everyone says, I'm not trying to develop something that exists or someone is planning. I'm just trying to use examples of things. My question is that, why does someone who has a religious feeling have to be opted out? He can't or she can't be automatically protected.
How the hell would you know?
Can I just
I mean, I don't know what your religious experiences are.
Wait. Jeff, help us understand what that would look like.
I'm just trying, like the hypothetical.
You can't do that
If you had
though,
a-
because people hear that and then we're not listening. Help us understand, if we're gonna let one person opt out of something that is the civil rights team, it's not in the curriculum, and I wanna be really clear. If anyone is watching from home, we are not teaching any curriculum that endorses gay marriage. We are not teaching anything within our curriculum that espouses any of the things you're suggesting.
Yeah, and I know, I'm not
And so you need to
accusing
clearly,
anyone of that.
but you need to be clear about that, because you're not being clear about that. And we need to be very, very
I don't know how I can be any
clear.
more clear, I just said I'm not promoting.
You're
it.
saying that for the first time.
Yeah.
And we just need to be very, very clear that our curriculum is not endorsing any of that.
And that's,
It's a club.
again, I'm just, we're talking about protecting people that have beliefs, right?
All people.
All people.
All people.
Everyone.
All people.
So someone who has a religious objection to something, my question is, can they say, religiously, I don't
Molly.
pretend this?
I'm sorry.
I think we're operating on
You're
a,
next, I swear.
no, we're talking about hypothetical opt-outs and using a policy of opt-out, but the situations are opt-in. Like,
Yes.
everyone can choose to attend, no one is being
If that's the
required.
answer, that's fine.
And we have an opt-out policy for if ever a situation where the curriculum requires something. We have the opt-out protection, but everything is opt-in
So
at this point.
Jeff, as far as the curriculum goes, curriculum that's part of their graduation, they have to provide an opt-out if they don't want to attend the curriculum based on religious, moral, or ethical beliefs. Part of that consideration is, does it align with the system of learning results? Whether the course content is required by state law or board policy. So if the content's required by state law, they probably can't opt out of that class. If the educational importance of the material for instruction which exemption is requested, evidence regarding the sincerity on the belief that where the request is made. So that goes back to James's point, where the principal has to decide, is this a sincere request? Or are they just reusing the religious card to get out of history class this afternoon? That's part of the decision, whether we have a legal obligation to exempt that student, so that goes into the protected classes. So there is a process to exist, and that's for curriculum. What everybody else is talking about are these other events, which Molly says, you don't have to go. You don't have to go to graduation if you don't want to go to graduation.
They're extracurricular.
The reason I'm bringing this up is that you need to make sure you protect yourself so you don't treat someone that way and they come back at you with one of these lawsuits. Because under the EEOC, when you want to opt out from working on religious reasons on Sunday, you don't have to prove your religious sincerity. And I think the Supreme Court backed that up, if I remember right, that I don't have to prove my religious beliefs to anyone. All I have to do is declare them. So I'm just saying, we need to think about all these things as a school board to protect the school so you don't do something in a policy or in a behavior that would draw that kind of legal action towards you.
I think we do have policies that do exactly what your concern is.
Okay, good, if we do. That's why I'm bringing it up.
We have people that have been really trying to talk for quite a while now. I guess I would ask that maybe we raise our hands so that everyone has a chance to speak. And I know Megan has been trying to speak for a while.
Actually, quite a bit of what I was gonna say was already said, so that's good, it was out there. I was just starting to feel a little bit frustrated and almost confused about our conversation because I felt like we were going way into some weeds that were really unnecessary for the conversation we were actually trying to have. And I thought we had had a conversation at the beginning of this about having this conversation and about talking about things that were actually relevant to what we're talking about. And while obviously the policies are completely relevant, and we did spend a lot of time on that exact policy this year, a lot of time, multiple meetings. And so I felt like we just keep saying the same thing over and over again. We have a policy in place for exactly what Jeff is talking about. And I was just feeling really frustrated that we were going in circles, and a lot of good points got brought up, and I'm glad they all got said, and that was all I had for that moment. Thank you.
Anyone else over here? Yes, Diane.
I like the last policy ADAA, which we are trying to have a school climate, which includes everyone.
Right.
So that ethical and responsible behavior can flourish. That's a beautiful phrase. And so that I can't imagine us doing anything that isn't to recognize groups, women, girls, anyone who have been marginalized by our society, and we all know there have been many, and we are trying to show how we can't have that in a learning situation. We just will not be doing that. That is not impugning anyone's religious beliefs or where they come from or what they believe. So I don't see the conflict.
Okay.
Wanted to ask a point of clarification, actually, just on that our policies are a little more broad than some of the statutes. And I know one of the statutes that we reference, cross-reference in, like say ACAAA is, so it's Maine, the revised statute 5. And that does talk about discrimination of protected classes and kind of details that sort of thing. Is that?
That's the Human Rights Act.
That's the Human Rights Act, yeah. So I mean, our policies aren't like, this isn't like the I don't know, street cleaning policy or so, I mean, a statute. Our policies are referencing the human rights statute.
Your policies are certainly in line with state and federal law. My only point was that by saying that you want everybody to belong regardless of situation, that's a little bit broader.
Gotcha.
You're giving protection to people who may not be in a protected class. But what you're generally saying is, if you feel marginalized, if you feel alone, what we're committed to doing is making sure that that changes, that you feel like you have a place here. And all of the things that we're doing are towards that goal. And that's a little bit broader than the law requires. That's all.
Thank you. Yeah, so our mission statement, is
Yeah.
really like encompassing. Yeah, I like that.
Okay, so just quickly, how does the school district provide students with a safe, discrimination-free experience? We've talked about policies. We've talked about more policies than I've had, and there are even more policies in there that also help you make sure that the students are in a discrimination-free environment. Providing leadership and modeling at the top, I think, is really important. And I'm not here to lecture you, but I just want to point out that that projecting that view of openness and support for everyone, from the board to the administration to teachers to everybody, is how kids can feel like they belong and how they can then flourish. So that's really important. Providing support to students who struggle, that goes without saying, and that's a lot of what I think we're talking about when we get to talking about flags is that's one type of support that studies have shown is very beneficial to students who feel marginalized. Having some sort of a something tangible that shows that people are behind them and that people have their back is a way to make people feel like they're part of the community. So that's important. And also supporting those adults who support them. And I think that in these times in particular, teachers around the state, I don't know that it's happened here, but I know it's happened in many districts around the state. You'll find that teachers are really targeted because of their support for marginalized portions of the student population. And having board support for that, I've seen around the state, is really important. The last thing, and probably the most important thing, is providing education at every step. And what I mean by that is things like the civil rights training that I'm not giving. But I mean that also, and perhaps at least as important, is providing your teachers, your staff, with the tools that they need to be able to appropriately see those lines that the First Amendment draws. See how you can support people and how you can support people and not violate anybody's rights. These are complicated issues. They're not things that you learn in college, and they're things that you really need to continue to educate people on. Education is also, of course, at the student level, making people understand that we're talking about everybody regardless of situation, and whether you agree or disagree with them, whether you agree or disagree with their situation, our school has said that they're a part of our school. I don't like people who wear plaid and stripes. It doesn't matter. They're a part of the school. And doing that education piece is really important.
This might be a good time for me just to chime in, Melissa, and I would reach out to the administration, to Angela and to Lauren to talk a little bit about this. As a result of the incident that occurred back in June, we've really acknowledged that there is more work that needs to be done, absolutely, and especially around this education piece. So we do have a plan that is being formulated for some training and some education at the student level, staff level, administration level. So I don't know if you could share just a little bit of what we already have planned. You already have planned to kind of move forward with that education?
Yeah, I can do that. I'm not gonna provide a ton of details until we're ready to share that out broadly. But generally speaking, it will be ongoing and sustained, because that's important for all levels, and that's part of that's how you learn. Episodic training, that never helps. And so we are going to, we're partnering with the Office of the Attorney General. They have a civil rights leader who will be working with us, with our staff first, and then we'll be working with students. We're working with the Maine Youth Action Network, who will be doing some student leadership work, facilitation, and civil discourse work. When we'll start with, we're partnering also with Healthy Communities of the Capital Area to develop that, to develop and host the training. And that will start with student leaders, identified student leaders or self-identified, but that's being formulated. We're gonna work with some student groups on that to make that determination. And then once we have a core group of students across all sectors of our school community who are considered leaders, trained in that, then we'll broaden that also. We are working with some mental health providers to also be thinking about anxiety, mental health and wellness, suicide prevention strategies through peer leadership models, training. We'll be engaging with the Maine Youth Action Network's peer leadership program and conference that they'll have this fall. That's a secret. There's so many that are puzzling. I'm like, which ones are which? So there's and we're a couple other things. We're also working on this one's in process, so I won't say the person's name yet. We're trying to connect with another community leader, a Maine community leader on who works with polarized communities. Not that we're necessarily polarized, but the concept of it, of two varying different viewpoints trying to engage in civil discourse. So that will be an adult level training, while the Maine Youth Action Network will be the student level training. And then there'll be some ongoing work using Joe Schmidt's new book around civil discourse. And he's a nationally recognized social studies educator. So there's a new published book on civil discourse. And so we'll do some continuous adult learning, and maybe more than adult learning, we'll see, on around that. So those are the pieces that are, and it's August, so as always, things are constantly changing. We're trying to get it all situated in the next few weeks to have like the year-long plan. And then one last thing we're doing is looking at devising a diverse kind of ad hoc group to be thinking about and supporting where are we at, where do we want to be based on the policies we have in place, and what's even more longer range learning opportunities for all of us. And that group would include different stakeholders, students, community, board, staff, administration. And it would be, as with anything, it takes a while for the group to get together and develop the outcomes and priorities and then develop the plan. And that group will look at data that we'll be collecting this year from community staff and students to see that we'll collect over time to see if we're making progress, collective progress towards this notion of a thriving community where all people feel like they belong and can effectively learn. Is that good? Any questions?
Exactly what I meant by provide education at every step. And I just have to say the sustained piece of that is just really awesome, because that is one of the most important things. So thank you for doing that.
I love, Angela, the idea of the polarizing conversations and being proactive rather than reactive, and to show us how to do it on the front end so that we're all ready and our tempers don't get flared, and so that's wonderful. And I also want to make sure our parents know that we want them in school. We want them to ask questions. We want them to be a really active part. There's a notion that we don't want parents in school, and that's absolutely not the case. I don't know if it's that way anywhere, but here we want our parents in school. We want them to have, I'm always saying, make a friend. Go to your kid's school and make a friend. Go ask the questions, know their teachers, know the administrators, because that's the way to find out the climate and to find out what's really happening, rather than relying on what could be a rumor of something that we're doing that we may or may not be doing at all. So I really appreciate that proactive approach.
I just have a little piece to add too. I had a really great meeting already with the civil rights team. They've identified some areas of focus this year. And shout out to Orna because she was part of it. They have a lot of great ideas. So it's how we can support those and build upon the work they're already doing. Angela hit a little bit on the sense-making survey information. So we really identified we wanted some like mental health resources. So building those into like some advising time, adding a little structure where we can get those resources to all students. Is going to be a big focus. Then again, that sustained piece. So how do we continue with that education? We're talking about kind of pulling all the students together and creating some like school-wide norms around some of this behavior. So that'll be some early work that we'll see at the beginning of the year.
And I would just add that the middle school has been working on this as well. I mean, these behaviors or these concerns don't surface just as students enter high school. You know, they need to be able to begin engaging in conversations at the middle school. So they are also a part of some of this training as well.
So shall we talk about flags? And can we skip the next slide and go to the next event? So let's talk about regulation of what can be displayed on the walls. I think that's what you came here to do. So I better deliver or you'll throw stuff at me. So step one, determine the form. Are these walls that you have, these bulletin boards, this school going to be a public forum, a private forum, or a limited forum? I'm going to try not to inject my own views into this too much, but I will say that I can't help but say that if you create a public forum, you'll regret it. And I think that a lot of schools find success with that sort of hybrid. Most of the school is a private forum where administration is sort of in charge of what goes on the walls, keeping in mind all of the things that they're trying to do about creating an inclusive environment, keeping in mind that they're trying to give students a voice in what's going on. So if you have different clubs, if you have different organizations that are trying to advocate for things, you're giving them a space to do that because that's part of the democratic process. But administration is sort of in charge of that, so that's a private forum. And some schools also provide that limited public forum that I talked about where people can put just about anything they want as long as it's respectful to get people to start getting used to that dialogue that they're going to be subjected to when they get out into the real world. That's a decision that you need to think about, that you need to talk about with the folks on the ground and come to a decision. Step 2, if it's private or limited, determine who's going to decide what content is permissible. So there are really 2 ways you can get to that. One is a board policy that says, here's what you can do and here's what you can't. And another is to put it in the discretion of administration. I don't think there's any other option. There is, I haven't thought of it. And step 3 is to communicate what is permissible and why. And that's a really important thing, because if people know, here's what our rules are and here's why, then it's less likely that they're going to violate those rules. So you want to communicate to your students and to your community that this is sort of how we're going to do things. So let's go back to the slide before this and talk about the issue of a board policy or discretion of the administration. Pros and cons to both. So I want to know what you guys think.
Can I ask you like a sidecar but related question about clothing? Because that was part of this
Ask me.
controversy too.
Yes.
I would have thought clothing, as long as it doesn't display obscene or disruptive symbolism, would be a private forum, like it's my body, it's what I wear. But we had a situation where we had administration telling students they could or could not wear certain iconography.
Okay, so that's kind of a mixture of some of the concepts I talked about before. And I kind of mentioned, which is the time, place, and manner concept. So a school can say that the classroom is not a place where you can advocate for volleyball over bowling. So you can make those time, place, and manner restrictions. Generally, the law will look at dress codes as a speech issue and give students pretty wide latitude. But it is possible to put in those time, place, and manner restrictions.
I guess I'm just concerned about fairness in that regard, because it's easy to go down a slippery slope in any direction there. Like, you can't wear your crucifix around your neck. You know, you can't wear your pride bangles for Pride Week. And who gets to decide what is and is not appropriate personal display just seems very murky to me. So I'd love to know if there's any prior case law, any other schools you could point to say this is how they approached it.
So there's a lot of cases on what you can restrict and why. You can restrict anything that has to do with drug use. You can restrict, obviously, anything that's pornographic, inappropriate, racist, hate speech, things like that. Probably things like the Confederate flag count as hate speech. But most things that people put on T-shirts are probably free speech.
So for clarity, what the administration had said at that time was no flags. So people were wearing flags as capes, or flags as a belt. That's what the administration limited, because the focus of the issue centered around flags. And it was a temporary, I think it lasted for a week.
Like 2 days or
It was a week.
So they were wearing gay pride flags or American flags?
Both. The whole point was either flag. We didn't want either flag, because that was the crux of the issue and the conflict at the time, so.
So just to step back and talk about that a little bit, because this is a really complex area of First Amendment law. So you have a gay pride flag, for example, and somebody doesn't like it and they come and cover it up with something else. So then you say no flags ever again. That has some potential constitutional issues, shall I say. Because what you're doing is saying, if somebody doesn't like your speech, then we're going to shut down everything. And that's not what the First Amendment is about as a broad matter. On the other hand, if that happens and it is deemed to be a safety violation or it's creating conflict within the school, then pushing the pause button and saying, let's all go to our own corners and pause it is probably fine. So I think that what was happened here was the pause button, not the shutdown. And I think that that's a really important thing to keep in mind, that shutting all speech down because somebody disapproves of somebody's speech is really contrary to what our First Amendment wants to see people do.
We had your second, Jack. Hi.
So, you said that flags were like banned wearing it, but also I believe if I remember in the letter, it just specified all flags, so that meant on the wall anywhere. And really, it didn't feel more like a pause, but more of a shutdown. Because then when we came back the next week, it was like 100 times worse of an environment than what was created before. So it wasn't like separating the two groups and being like, okay, everybody calm down, like take a breather. It was like, we're gonna like just shut down everybody.
And the question that I was responding to had to do with dress code, okay? And so that's why I spoke to that, but it was a pause and it was lifted the very following week. So it was in place for a week. So I'm sorry if it didn't feel that way, but that was the intent, given the concern of safety at the time by the administration who were in the building when the situation happened. But I know it was not an ideal situation for anyone involved. And so that's partly why we're here, to have this conversation and to really look at what steps can we take moving forward to make sure nothing like that happens again, so that all students feel safe and protected moving forward. Yes.
I also think that what happened with the two flags wasn't really like two sides of like free speech being shut down. One side was hate speech against another group. And so and I know you guys didn't like mean for that to happen, like you didn't want it to happen. But when you shut down all flags, you really gave the people who were being hateful like a lot more power than they had before. What my friend said, I remember every morning of the week of the ban, way more than ever, my friends would come to me and tell me about how they had been called like 5 slurs on the way to class. And yeah, so.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thank you for that.
Yeah, and if I could just jump in and say that those stories and sharing that, it really is, as the superintendent said, why we're here. These are complicated issues that people have to decide in the moments right away. And so having a discussion, a conversation, the beginning of a conversation and more conversation, so that we really become more familiar with what the law is and what the effects of what we do are, means that we're going to be able to improve in the future. So again, to echo what was said, I think what you said is really important. I remember you.
Two things. First, I want to draw a separation between a piece of fabric hanging on the wall and the words that people are saying. Is the words that people are saying, if they are saying things that are hateful and hurtful, that's wrong, full stop. And no policy here is going to say anything otherwise. We want everybody, literally everybody, to feel safe in their own skin and in the halls. As for the flag issue, in the beginning of the meeting, we sort of, I thought, came to the conclusion that in our policies, the administrators have the ability to approve things that hang on the walls. And that the pride flag that was hanging had the permission of the administration to be hanging on the wall. And somebody came to that spot and without permission, took a flag of a political figure and put that over the top. It does not matter what those two flags looked like. Based on our policy, the person placing the flag over the top is the one who made a poor choice. And that was the one that violated policy. If somebody had come with a pride flag to a respectful political discourse section of the wall and put their flag up over a political figure's flag, then that also would have been a poor choice. So it's separate, like the issue, the social issues behind it, I believe, like have to be kept separate from our just policy for keeping the peace in our halls.
So let's talk about, I mean, you're right that currently the policy or the practice is that administration is going to make these decisions. There has been, I think, some suggestion or some thought that this might be something that would be good for a board policy. And I want to just have that discussion real quick, what the pros and the cons are of a board policy. In that respect, I'll tell you generally my view on policies is that they should be used sparingly. And that there are certain policies you have to have by law, so you have to have them. But if you're talking about discretionary policies, I think that policies that look at things from 30,000 feet and are aspirational are really important because that is part of leading from the top. But I think that policies that are very specific and get into details at you as a board, detailing what educators are going to do and not do, are sometimes problematic partly because you're not really the experts on that, with all due respect. All due respect, really. But also because you can't write a policy that contemplates anything that can happen. And you can't, and a policy that, once it's a policy, it's sort of like written in stone. And there are times when there are reasons to veer from that policy. So giving somebody discretion makes sense. So that's a con. Yes.
Sorry.
So
I was doing
you have it written down, so.
Well, it's so I don't.
He's doing his homework.
It's so I don't ramble or say things that I shouldn't. And I even censor myself as I go along too. This is an agreement with you or not, but the board isn't in the schools on a day-to-day basis. Parents aren't in schools on a day-to-day basis. I'm pretty involved with my son's education in the school district, but I'm not there every day. Hell, unless he's late for missing a bus or something like that, I'm never there. And I've been on the board now for 3+ years and I've been to the high school sparingly. So the fact that we try to come up with an overarching policy to say that you can do this, can't do this, post this, not do this, I think is just stupid.
There it is.
Say what you
There it
think.
is. Say what you think.
It's candid, it's not rude,
No, it's not.
and it's just my opinion.
Right.
So, and anyone can agree or disagree with it, because also, now I'll veer off topic. Even though this is recorded and everyone, is clearly heard by the microphones, people are gonna hear what they wanna hear tonight, who goes back and watches this. And things are gonna be misconstrued when the meeting's done. And they'll get on whatever, social media and stuff like that, and then the rumors will spread about the new policies we developed tonight, despite not doing anything, not voting on anything, but give it a week or two, and people will start talking about it. So, that's why I write stuff down, because I'll keep going. But with regards to this, the administrators are there for a reason. We didn't just take the first person who applied off of Indeed and throw them into the principal's position. Yes, and they've been doing it, for a while. So you defer to the people who are in the building every damn day.
I think I can speak to like what our plans are moving forward. So we've had a lot of discussions about this summer, and keeping in spirit of our current policies, how it would look for what's on the walls, what's on our bulletin boards, is giving our clubs, our classrooms equitable access to those boards, whether we have it on a rotating basis throughout the year, coming up with some clear guidelines for, it needs to be educational, it needs to be appropriate, that kind of stuff. We can have a form that they fill out with what they want to put on it, some kind of like proposal that we would approve. But keeping in the spirit of our policies, being equitable to all students, all clubs, and really using those spaces around our school in a positive way. But having a more organized system for what that looks like is our plan for next year. So again, coming up with your proposal, what is your board gonna look like, what's the information? And then we approve it, it goes up.
And so you are proposing a private forum, private forum. Okay, Jim.
Yeah, first off, I couldn't say it better than Matt did. And I agree with that we should be leaving it in the hands of the administrators. But secondly, the one thing I do want to be concerned about, if there is an issue that is controversial, I don't want to shy away from it. If you want to have a gay pride flag on the wall and you've approved it, if somebody gives that person a hard time, we need to come down on whoever's doing that like a ton of bricks. I don't have a problem with that at all. And unless we enforce our policies, we're doing our students a disservice. Even those that disagree, they need to know there are boundaries which they cannot pass. And because that's what we all have in society. If I want to disagree with Becky because I don't like what she stands for, and I walk up and I start cussing her out and telling her what a lousy person in a public forum, that's inappropriate. I'm sorry, but that is. And you need to learn that there's a boundary. We disagree on a few things.
We do.
But we get along real well.
We sure do.
But we can disagree on those things.
Absolutely.
Without having animosity. And that's the problem we have. I have a daughter that's gay. She was afraid to tell me. I'm a fat old white guy. They're looking at me and saying, geez, what's Dad gonna say? Okay, life goes on. I love her. I'm supporting her. I love her partner. They're good people. I have 2 other daughters. Good husbands. I don't care. I like the people. I don't care about titles. And so if you're going to do something, you stand behind it. And if somebody creates an issue for that, I am absolutely opposed to letting that continue. And I certainly don't want to see them win, period. If you're creating an issue like that. And I've spent all I'm going to say tonight.
Thank you.
Maybe.
Can I clarify something you said?
But sure.
If somebody disagrees with that pride flag hanging on the wall that has permission to be up there, and they do so in a way that is disrespectful or vandalizing, then that's when you come down. But if somebody is attempting to engage in a way that is respectful, that is discourse, that is the sort of thing, because we have a policy that supports all people, no matter what their opinions are, then we need to be modeling and encouraging that respectful discourse.
I'm speaking to the specific issue that happened at our school.
I know.
On that
I'm just
particular
clarifying.
situation. But I agree with you. Yes, you can, there could be discourse, and that's fine. I mean, a lot of people don't agree with me, but we live with it.
And I can speak from our end, it's a zero tolerance policy for hate speech, discrimination, all of that, no questions asked. I think the hard part for some people, especially students and parents, is that when we have a disciplinary consequence that occurs, which obviously 100% I will guarantee will if that behavior happens, we can't speak about it with others that aren't involved. So just because you might not hear about it, there's gonna be a consequence according to policy. It's just hard because other than us and Pat, it's not gonna be out there in terms of what that consequence was, just to protect student privacy. So that's the hard part, but I always tell the kids, if you have any questions, come speak to me, come let me know what's going on. I can't tell you, you know, what consequences given to a certain person, that's private, but I can talk to you what our discipline order says and what our policies state, but.
And that incidents always have to be reported.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah,
There's always an assumption that we know things that we don't know. If they're not reported, it's difficult for the administration to address, but things will be addressed if we know about them.
And it needs to be understood throughout the community, throughout the community, that the board has like 5 roles, and that's not one of them. None of the roles that that is the job of the board is to be in the building telling people what to do. That's not our job. We set curriculum, we set the budget, we expel students, we do 2 other things. We hire the superintendent. Our work is really limited, and it's not inside the school buildings. And that's a really important piece for folks to understand. The school board's the last stop, not the first stop.
Which is true, and I go ahead, okay. Okay, but, and I'm just gonna say that, but being totally supportive of the fact that there are gonna be consequences.
Absolutely.
If people violate what the policies that the
Absolutely.
administration has put in place is what's really important, because sometimes you'll have a discipline that people know about because yak, and then you're gonna get complaints. And if you're backing up instead of backing your administrators, that's when it gets watered down. So when I'm saying support the people
Absolutely.
who support marginalized people, that's really important too. Drawing that zero tolerance line, and you as a board saying, that is the line that we have instructed our administrators to draw because this is our mission, these are our policies. Sorry about that.
That's okay. I think it actually helped clarify a little bit for me, because really it was more of a question, like, we keep saying policies and admin is saying policies, and I'm trying to figure out the permission that was given to hang a flag was permission granted by the administration, right? It wasn't a board policy.
Correct.
And so we don't have a policy. We've placed a pause policy.
What
But
you
We
have
enacted a pause.
is you have the student handbook, okay? The student handbook in the past has been presented to the board through the policy committee. And in the student handbook, there is language that says that the administration gets to decide what is hung on the wall. So it's a procedure, but officially you could call it a policy because you have approved the student handbook.
Okay,
Okay.
that's the
Yeah,
point
if
I'm
you're
trying to
gonna be
understand here.
Totally precise legal board policies, the ACAs and the BGRs and whatever they are. And you do procedures, but
I'm just trying to understand what are
keyword.
we calling policies versus what they're enforcing as policies, because I want to put it in their hands, but I can't tell if they're enforcing our policies.
And our procedures, like, so, you know, our
Yeah.
policies, like no discrimination, you know, our procedures are.
And I don't mean to get
No, they're just,
so
they're
technical.
pieces, they're
But
pieces of
so long
our
as we're
policy.
training them
Yes.
with proposed training,
Yes.
then we just support them.
And I didn't mean to intimate in any way that we wouldn't have their backs. We don't operate outside this room. We're only a board when we're all together, all 12 of us. So if we're out in the community listening to things that are happening at the high school that are maybe gonna come to us, maybe not gonna come to us because they're just not within our bailiwick at that moment, then we just need to walk away from that and say, you know, call your building administrator. But no, 100%, the board is behind you all the time. That's our job.
and I think Mrs. Henderson.
I was just gonna stress that I agree with the students 100% need to know that that we're behind them. Because this is not a new issue. Like this, my sister, she graduated I think 2 years ago, and she was dealing with the same thing every day on the bus being called racial slurs, being called homophobic slurs almost every single day. And I myself have faced that too, and even more after the incident this year. So I definitely agree with you that it's important that we stress to the rest of the students that we're behind them, and we're going to continue to be behind them.
Once again, we just encourage that open conversation, like just come talk to us anytime. We all obviously don't support that, and we want to make sure we can support you and help.
I just want to jump in a little bit just to appreciate everybody's dialogue tonight. And I really hear the students and our student rep, Ms. Henderson. And just to absolutely endorse, obviously, that those slurs are not okay. And that's not something that I am here for. And I think that we're not here for. To kind of get, Melissa, to your thing about pros and cons, right? So restricting speech. So the pro is that then it gives us a platform to hold people accountable if that speech crosses the line, right? So that's a pro to that. A con is that then we shut down too much speech. And I think that a version of that happened, and I understand for safety kind of fundamentals this spring. And so, and I guess just maybe I'm just echoing what Colin said, you know, that it's a slippery slope at that point of where to find that balance of, yes, we need to restrict speech here because we want to make sure that everybody does feel safe. At the same time, if we overreact to that, it can become very draconian and actually have the opposite effect of the dialogue we're looking for to protect our democracy.
Those decisions come into play that we're referencing those policies are like, these are the things that we can't have on the wall, like hate speech, bad language, inappropriate materials. So it's really, we wouldn't be too restrictive other than those categories.
This whole conversation tonight is fascinating for me because the ones you just mentioned, because of so many lawsuits and confrontations, are actually pretty well delineated at this point. So what the conversation here actually comes down to is what's offensive? What am I offended by?
Right. Yeah.
And is what I feel pride about offend you? And is what you feel pride about offend me? And how much tolerance do we have to be offended in shared spaces?
So I don't think offensive speech is unprotected. Offensive speech is really at the core of the First Amendment.
I'm not talking like capital O offensive. I'm talking about like,
right, little
you don't
o
like this
offensive
cartoon character
is
that I
part
have
of
because it
First
represents.
Amendment speech. People are going to be offended by other people's views. And so, and we as a school, as an educational institution, need to create a space and teach people how to express what might be offensive to other people in a way that is respectful and it sort of invites dialogue rather than shuts people down and is not targeted towards individuals, but rather is targeted towards larger ideas. That's part of the education that I think you're going to be working on. And that's it. Bam.
Yes, Jeff.
Is there, when we talk about hate speech, is there a definition of it? Is there a list of things that are hate speech? I mean, is that subjective to the person that's hearing it?
So hate speech is a term that lawyers tend to shy away from because there are a couple of Supreme Court cases that include some definitions of that term, but it can be overbroad. But if you think about something that is, it's almost like threat speech. Is really what hate
Well,
speech
who gets
is.
to determine it though? I mean, you know, like the administrators, if we're gonna allow them to be making the, how would they know
That's why I
what's
say,
hate speech?
that's why I'm saying that one of the key things here, and one of the most important parts of making all of this work is education to them so that they can draw those lines. So that when they hear somebody say something, they know whether that's hate speech or it's just little o offensive speech. If you call somebody a racial slur, that's hate speech. If you, or, something like that, if you, say something that you disagree with somebody's political views or
Taylor Swift's music
religion or
isn't that
something like
good.
that, that's probably a little, what? Yeah.
Taylor Swift's music isn't that good.
I've always heard.
You can't say that.
Stay in your lane,
I've always heard it
friend,
described
stay
as,
with
speech you might hate, doesn't make it hate speech.
No,
It just
that's
means,
true,
you know,
and hate speech is more like threat speech. It's more like speech that is individually threatening and really gets at somebody's core.
Particularly derogatory
Yeah.
towards a certain group.
Or a person.
Matthew and then Jared.
I agree with Cullen that it is a interesting discussion, and with the little o, it all comes down to perception. Some people are looking to get offended, and they're gonna, whatever's gonna set them off that day of the week. When I was in Toronto, the Colin Kaepernick kneeling thing happened, and I was on active duty, they assumed, as a good red-blooded American, I thought he should have been, murdered at the spot and not paid and everything, but it was a freedom of speech issue. It's the same thing with burning a flag. I think you're a moron if you burn the flag because you're burning the symbol that gives you the power to do that and not go to jail. But hey, it doesn't change me one way or the other. But with the things to hate speech, the Taylor Swift comment is perfect.
I'm gonna get emails about that.
Yeah, you are, every
Person in here should be a Red Sox fan. So if I have a hat that says Yankees suck, is that hate speech? Or is it just,
Well, they do, right?
I do agree.
They can't seem to win, so yeah, they must have.
But if you're from away, like me, maybe you were born in the Bronx and, that's a problem too. So if I offended you, little o, and what's the widths and breadths of that? And again, the people in the building are gonna have to make that call. But also, sorry, again, I didn't write it down, so I rambled. The fact that it is an interesting discussion is, I don't want to say it's dispassionate, but people are allowed to talk and people actually listen. They're not just waiting for their turn to get their point across type of thing. So it is a good discussion.
Jared.
I was just gonna help answer Jeff's question a little bit. You were asking about hate speech and how it's defined and how we define it. And I think really what we do in the front office is we work with the two concepts, which are harassment and bullying. And those are kind of our legal and policy-based terms that we work with. And those are defined, and they're both defined differently. One being more broad than the other. And at least one of them does depend on the perception of the victim. And that's defined in law. So to your point, and to answer your question, we have to make decisions, and sometimes the violation of the rule is caused by speech or actions or expressions that the victim perceives as bullying or harassing that the offender may not see that way. So that's where it gets muddy. So to your point, there's a lot that goes into making those determinations.
We're following state law a lot with that too.
We're bigger than an umpire. You're out, you're safe.
From the knees to the armpits.
Yeah.
That's what strikes me.
So shall we go forth? Thank you all.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Melissa.
Just one more time, this institution guarantees educational opportunities regardless of classification.
And live by that. Everybody, thanks for coming and for your active participation. Take sunscreen.
I had it, I just had to give it to the kid.
do it.
So,
It is August.
no,
saying.
this meeting is adjourned.
Becky?
Yes.
Before you adjourn,
Yes.
are we going to be getting a report from the administration on this subject, as what they're planning on for the next year?
She just kind
They
of gave
just
us.
Gave, that was included.
That's it for right
Okay.
now. That's it for right now.
Okay.
Greater detail can be shared as time goes along.
That's what I was getting at.
Sure.
I mean, it's kind of a, it was kind of a broad stroke,
Yeah.
and I'd like to get just a little bit more detail.
Listening to,
No.
and the very next thought in my head was immediately.
So are we adjourned? We're adjourned.
Just
So
for
moved.
Jerry Styles. It was the instant, like immediate